From the Raceland 72 U.S. 30 Dragster, the Coca-Cola bottlers of Chicagoland present the Mr. Chevrolet USA Super Bike Car Showdown. From Pennsylvania, it's three-time national champion Jungle Jim Lieberman. From Dallas, Texas, Martin Watson's Drag-On Vega. From Alabama, the bold one, Bobby Wood. From New Jersey, Bruce Weston's Fantastic USA 1.
So awesome. That's the greatest intro ever, man. This makes me happy.
You're right. The flyby. It's like right after you get done singing the national anthem and it's just, yeah. And you're at the 1,000-foot mark and it's like, here comes the train.
Yep. And that's the 1,000-foot mark is about my favorite spot because the clutches are completely locked up. The tires are extended. I mean, that thing's digging in. It's all the fuel. It's just getting everything, and it's putting down some beans at that point because that's where she's laying down power.
Yeah, that's where if it was a diesel, it'd be rolling some serious coal at that point.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, we got a ton of them in here tonight. I can't even keep up with the chat's already blowing through, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing because it could be worse. Like there's 5 people in here, and the chat hasn't moved since we started. But I'm just going to go through and tell everybody, hey, and, thanks for coming and showing up on a Wednesday night. It's 60-something degrees here in the Nashville area.
Me too. We got the windows open, man. I drove home. I had the windows down, and I was like, man, this is actually rather nice.
My garage heater hasn't ran in 2 days, and I went out there today and I'm like, oh, I got to kick this on. It's not going to be warm in here. And I turned it on. I'm like instantly sweating. So, so we got Clint Street Machines in here, Travis Mopar Garage, Auto Salvage Outlaws, Mopar Man 1978. Uncle Squirrels came by and blessed us with some squirrels. Nice. Mohawk 62, Big Block 402 channel. David James, what's up, G? Mostly old parts and rust. Fab Race Mod Repeat from Northeast Dragway, Chris Cox. Wanna be good evening. It's a long week. Yeah, well, it does seem to be crawling by. Usually it's like, oh man, it's already Wednesday. And then once that happens, then the week goes super fast. But it did kind of have a snail's pace this week.
Not for me. I've been working really hard lately. Yeah. So
well, I've been working hard as well. It's just this week just seemed to go by ridiculously slow. Yeah. So I'll get into it here in a second. Colleen Tebow's in here. Let's see. Anybody else that's a new name? Scale Modeling on the Cheap says, love that intro. And Two Hacks Jeff has given us the rock on fingers. I don't know, whatever you call it. Yes.
The horns.
Yep, the horns. Okay, Testa Speed Shop is in here. And man, it's running pretty good right now. I can't even keep up. Can't even catch up, I guess.
Right.
All right. Yeah. So I think we're there. Okay. Well, that's everybody. I went to the junkyard yesterday. It's like literally like one of my favorite places to go. Right. It's where you can shut the world out and take parts off. And Tennessee doesn't have all the flash and flare of SoCal in the junkyard, but there is some pretty decent places to go. I found a transmission tunnel that I thought I was going to be able to use in my 63 Special that was out of a 73 Pontiac Grand Le Mans GT or something, Sport Le Mans GT.
Mm-hmm.
It was an original 4-speed car. And yesterday I showed up there with all my bucket of tools and all that jazz, and I grabbed the cart and pulled it out there. And I was set to cut the floor out of that car. And I cut the carpet back, and there is nothing holding that 4-speed lump to the floor at all. It is literally like a Swiss cheese floor, right? And I literally almost broke down and cried right there because I was betting on using that thing instead of spending $1,200 or $800 or $900 or whatever it is for a Nova floor, and then only using the tunnel out of it. So I'm still gonna find a B body, and then I'll buy that lump for the 4-speed.
Why not? Yeah, just get it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to find a car that has one and cut one out. I just need to find a car that doesn't have a transmission in it. I figured it's going to be pretty damn hard to get it out with a Sawzall with a reciprocating saw. with the transmission underneath of it. You're probably going to be gouging the tranny all up,
You know,
breaking off sawzall plates.
I have one of those little cutting wheels. That's a it's a DeWalt or whatever it
A
is.
battery operated one, right?
Yeah, dude, I'm telling you, I use that thing on everything. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. I might do that. I might just break down and buy that tool so I can go cut the floor out of something, but I don't. Yeah. I don't know. I thought my Sawzall was going to work. I was just looking for something that didn't have a tranny in it, and I found there was a 77 Cadillac. And I'm like, oh, you can't get any better than that big old floor pan and transmission tunnel, right?
Yeah.
And it seemed to be in pretty good shape, but again, the cool thing was it had a 500 Caddy in it. I thought about grabbing it. Would that be cooler in the Suburban? I don't know.
I don't know, man. I like the Buick. The Cadillacs are cool, but I just like the Buick, man. It's to me, it's kind of growing on me having a Buick in that thing. I know it's yours and everything, but at the same time, it's like, it's been around and we've made so many like miles per gallon out of the damn thing. Can't get rid of it now at this point.
I really want to eclipse like 20, right? That's 100% more than what it got from the factory.
That's a thing, and I'm still working on that right now with my fuel injection on the Slant 6. Oh, I do have a little update. I took the fuel pump that was on the fender because I'm enjoying the fuel injection so much. I took that out and I put a fuel pump in the tank, so one of those drop-in ones. And man, it just runs so much better.
With another fuel pump in it.
Yes, yeah. I had the one that was in the fender well, and that one worked. It worked fine. But I was trying to keep that, like, I still might put a carburetor back on it type of setup. Right. But, no, not anymore. I'm going to, I'm not anymore.
Stick to the EFI, huh?
Here's why, is that I got some really cool stuff. Going through the little parts bin that we have there, I found some of the old Jeep throttle bodies. Now, it's a 4-barrel, but it's only got injectors in the front, too. So I can block off the back two and then just have a 2-barrel fuel injection. So I can try 4-barrel fuel injection, throttle body, and 2-barrel. Which one's better for Slant 6? So I'm going to try that also. So I grabbed a few of those, and then I had this epiphany. There was 3 of them in there. So what can I make with 3 of them? I can make an individual throttle body for Slant 6, each one of them, all the way across.
That would be actually kind of cool.
Yes, it would
you're
absolutely.
Definitely going to have to get very fabricated on the intake manifold to make that work. I'm sure of it.
Already working on it. Gill Welding. He makes that little log style with the runners. So basically something like that. Put a 2-barrel on it, goes right in there. It'd be good. Yeah.
All right, we got our first question. This is Ron Ward, the voice of the No Name Nationals.
Oh, what's up, man?
Ron says, "Hey Shane, what are your thoughts on bushing lifter boards for a street strip engine? Are the benefits worth the cost?"
Absolutely. I wouldn't. Is this a big block or a small block? But either one. On the small block, I wouldn't. You don't really need to bush the lifter boards. Honestly, on the small block, you can just copper tube it. And you can do that yourself. If it's a big block, definitely bush the lifter boards. But it's always a good idea, especially on a street strip engine. They just work better. It just works great. I've never had a bad problem doing it unless the machine work was done bad. But I've always say go for it. What's your thoughts on it?
Me, I've never bushed any. No, I've never bushed any lifters. The matter of fact, I probably should have, because the engine that's in the 94 Ford, the 393 Windsor, when I first got it running, it ate a camshaft. One of the lifters ate a camshaft, and it's not a factory roller cam block 351 Windsor. It had the retrofit lifters in it, and when it ate that camshaft, that lifter stopped rolling. It ate the wheel off, right? Like it flat spotted the wheel, and that thing egged out that lifter bore so bad. You could see it by eye. And I'm like, oh, that's not good at all. What am I going to do here? I mean, I just spent like $2,000 building this motor, and it was supposed to last 5 years or 6 years. And I don't have any extra cash. So I just put wheel cylinder hone in there, cleaned it up, and put a lifter back in it. So,
Yeah.
but
Well,
they are
see,
link bar style lifters, but it
yeah.
ticks pretty good.
And here's the thing for me on the reason why I do it is that I've been messing with small block Mopars, and once I figured out that that oil galley on the passenger side is the main oil galley, and it would hydrolock the lifters with high volume. Remember we were talking about this earlier about pumps and
Right.
whatnot.
Yeah.
As soon as I copper tubed that thing, I had no more lifter problems ever again. So to me, it's like the first thing I did is I did all the oiling tricks as soon as I got the small block Mopar. So to me, it's always worth it. And I'm looking at his. He said here, did I see it? Mostly old parts and rust.
Mostly
Yep.
old parts and Russ is asking you another question. But
Oh, okay.
The original question was from mostly old parts, which is Ron Ward.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, there's okay. Gotcha. All right.
Yeah, Patrick's mostly old parts and rust.
God, they're so close, man.
I know. I thought they were the same person for the longest time.
Yeah.
So well,
I say go for it.
What do you got to lose?
Yeah.
I'm assuming that you probably have to drill that. If you were saying just copper tube it, you got to drill that copper tube, right?
Yeah. You just go get a rigid tube, and then what I do is I have it's a 1/2-inch drill bit, and then from there, then I have a reamer that reams it out to final size, and then you just hammer in the copper tube, and then I take a lifter, and then I grind it down so it's kind of like a wedge, and then I just hammer it through, and then what it does is it basically peens the copper tube, and then what I do is when you do the first one, then I put a lifter in there. Then I do the second one. I put a lifter in there, so that way it doesn't rotate when you're hitting it. So that way it stays even all the way across. And then after I do that, then I just run like a little hone through it and just hone it out. And then after that, it's good to go.
Huh. Well, let's see. Mostly old parts and rust now says. So on the drop-in EFI pump, Shane, stock tank question
Yes.
mark. EFI tank, we need
No.
details.
Yeah, it's a stock tank, and it's one of those that you just pick up and you just drop right in, and it's got a setting unit right on it. I was worried about that, and it's quiet. It's just a Walbro, like I think 255 pump, and I was worried about, you hear those cars pull up and all you hear is the fuel pump in the tank. It just drives me nuts. That was my biggest fear, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to put it in this weekend. And I put it in, and as soon as I hit the key, it was so quiet. I was just like, wow, this is amazing. Like it's internally regulated too for 58 pounds. So I'm just running the stock fuel line up to the front, and then it goes to like a 2-inch conversion line. Then it goes to -6, and then it runs a -6 steel braided line right up to the pump, to the throttle body. Yeah, it works good.
Well, Clint Street Machine asks, Professor P on a big block Mopar with roller rockers, oil through shafts or push rods?
I do them both. Always oil. The more oil, the better, especially to the valve train. I always try to oil them both. So whatever I do is I always get the lifters that have the EMC style lifters that oil up through the lifter itself, and then oil up through the push rod. And then I always try to run, instead of a cup, I always try to get ball and ball, and then just change the rocker arm so that way it's like a cup, like a GM style. So that way you can run anyone's push rod. You don't have to run a factory, style of Mopar where it's a ball and cup. That's how I try to always do it. That's how all my Mopars run out here right now, is ball and ball with a cup style rocker. What about you?
Me? I don't know. The Buicks, they're so marginal on oiling. I try to stick to even the oil through the head engines that I've done. I generally convert them to oil through the push rod. I think that they oil better.
Yes, and that's and in fact, the Gen 3 Hemi's been they oil up through the head, through the rocker, and then down the push rod to the lifter. So I like the fact that the new lifters are oiling up. We have the Evolution lifter that oils around the body and then oils up through the push rod also. So that way the rocker's getting oil from both directions, and it helps out quite a bit with cooling.
Yeah. I've never tried both on a Buick just because they have so marginal oiling that I didn't want to take away any more oiling to the mains than what was necessary. I've never seen a problem where they destroy valve train parts. Now the later, there's like 3 versions of Buick rocker arm assemblies, valve train, right? So you have your early style, which is the solid push rod where it oils through the head.
Yeah.
Then you have your 1970 and 71 style rocker arm where it oils through the push rod, just like a conventional Chevrolet. But those have a problem with the rocker arms eating the shaft. And it's an aluminum rocker arm. It eats the steel shaft. And I always assumed that was from oiling. Okay. And I'm like, I don't know how well that works. Well, when you take one of those engines, you start it up, you see that it doesn't oil as well as the later 72 and up stamped steel rocker arms. For some reason, those oil so much better, and I think it's because the oiling hole is less restricted. And so I saved those crap rocker arms, which I got piles and piles and piles of them.
Yeah.
I saved those for like special occasions. Like I got this 70 stage 1 455 that I'm working on for my my dad, which was my dad's car before he passed away, and now it's mine. But I wanted it to be bone stock. I wanted to have a bone stock stage 1 455. I didn't want higher ratio rockers. I didn't want stuff that came on it, or it didn't come on it from the factory. I wanted stage 1 stuff, and it's not hopped up. It just has oiling mods done to the block, and everything else is factory. It's even a factory cam, factory style timing chain, just has the oiling mods. And that's it. That's all I did to the thing. And I wanted to leave it. Matter of fact, I found some new old stock spark plugs. So I'm putting new old stock spark plugs in it. And I'll probably have new old stock plug wires and cap and rotor and the whole 9 yards. I just want it to be a 70 stage 1 from the factory and then see what it's like.
That'd be awesome. Yeah. I like that. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, it's been hard finding this stuff. Let's see. One-Eyed Cat says you people are forgetting to hit the like button on the way in. Go back and fix it now. Yeah. Shane and I aren't moving any further forward till you do that.
Right?
Yeah. We need some likes and some thumbs up, even some thumbs down.
There's actually a really good question right there. Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a good one.
What's your thoughts on oil aeration in a hydraulic lifter?
That I actually know quite a bit about this. And in fact, we talked about this a few weeks back about how to preload a lifter, a hydraulic lifter. I actually do it from 20 thousandths off the bottom. And the reason for that is that way you're basically compressing all the oil out of the lifter and trying to keep the low pressure side of the lifter as little as possible. And that way too, obviously if it starts to get some oil aeration in there, then it just becomes a solid at that point. There's only 20 thousandths in the lifter, which comes out to about, I think it's about 30 at the actual rocker tip. But that's the reason why I set my lifters up like that. A lot of people like to go 20 thousandths from top down. I come from the bottom up, and for that exact reason is oil aeration. So so what's that?
Maybe I do things wrong. I don't know. I measure the travel.
Yeah, and go right in the middle.
I try to go in the center. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's totally fine. And that's great. But if you're racing it, or like if you're really hitting high RPMs with it, the way to do it is basically from the bottom up. You basically follow it to the bottom, and then you just set it up from the bottom. And the reason for that is so that way, if you ever have a problem, especially when the extended high RPMs, really, if you're drag racing, you're really not going to have a problem because, it's only about, 12, 13 seconds for most cars. But it's going to be for like people who are going down a long straightaway, going into a turn, or, some street driving, or like dodging cones. That's where you're really going to see it. Yeah.
Well, Mopar Man 1978 has a question here. Has anybody had luck running those Edelbrock electric fuel pumps? Are they noisy?
Which one is he talking about?
I don't know. I'm assuming he's probably talking about the one like you had in your fender where it was essentially the cup.
Oh, it's quiet. Couldn't even hear it run. It was absolutely quiet. It's a Warbro 255 pump. It's the exact same pump that I put in the tank. It's just your standard high pressure, 58-pound style of pump. It's really silent. It works good. It's just that I know that this is something I'm going to stick with because I like how it drives, and I just like a lot of things about it. So that's the reason why I put one in the tank instead of just having it in the fender well.
Huh. Well, 38 POS Racing says, years ago, I bought a 71 455 Centurion that had a drop valve. Turned out it had a stage one. It had stage one heads on it. And too bad it dropped a valve because it probably gacked those stage one heads.
Yeah.
At least one of them. Man, and you know what? They're like, the neat thing about the Buick line was the Riviera could actually get anything that Buick offered, right? So you could go order a stage one Riviera with the stage two trunk option, right? And that's what they were called at the time. It was essentially the dealership would install the stage two heads and the B4B intake manifold and the headers and the camshaft and the set of gears for you. And they all would come in the trunk when you bought the car. It came from GM with this stuff in the trunk, and then the dealer would install it.
Yeah.
That is like a a Centurion is actually the top of the line full size car. I guess people probably don't realize, but a Centurion could get the same treatment as the Riviera. Anything, because it's the Centurion is what replaced the Wildcat in 70. 70 was the last year for the Wildcat. 71 was the first year of the Centurion. So you could have got everything that the Wildcat could have gotten, which is anything Buick offered on a Centurion. So that's pretty interesting news.
Yeah.
I've never looked for one of those, but I did see a 70 stage one 455 Riviera in the junkyard at Shane, what was that junkyard in San Diego?
Pick apart.
No, it wasn't Pick Your Part. It wasn't one on Nirvana. It was down on the 905. And it was by you go to the AM/PM, turn left, right? And Memory Lane, is that right?
Oh yes, Memory Lane. Yep.
Yeah, and that's where I saw that car. It was on the back row where they stashed all the full cars, right? Like
yes,
all of them. I almost cried when I saw it, and I called my dad. And this was like 1994, so I had to drive out to the AM/PM and call my dad. Hey, anything you need off of a 70 Riviera stage one 455? He's like, yeah, carburetor, intake, block, transmission, and I'm living in a Foot Locker in Navy or in a Navy Logic, right? Like in an open
you're gonna have
barracks.
room for that, right?
Yeah, and like open bay barracks. Okay, which side of my Foot Locker you want me to put this in, Dad?
Yeah, right. 75 pounds of cast iron in there, sure, no problem. Got it.
Yeah. Let's see. So Mopar Man 1978 saying it's the Edelbrock pump that's on the speed accessory shelf at O'Reilly's. Don't remember the number or model number.
I don't know. While you're talking here, I'll look it up here real quick.
I wonder if that's those little dinky pumps.
I think it's one of those clicky pumps. You know what I mean? Those like facet style.
Yep, the ones like the early Carters, but they're miniaturized.
Yes, I might be. I'm just going to O'Reilly's real quick and just gonna check it out real quick. But yeah, I believe that's it. I really don't know anything about those, honestly. Unfortunately,
I use them to drain fuel pumps or gas tanks at the junkyard.
Oh yeah, that works. Yeah.
Yeah, because you just take your battery for your drill or something. It's just a positive and negative, and then a charging sensing signal wire lead on it, and you just hook that thing up, positive, negative, and that little pump works great at like 18 or 20 volts. So Dean Stevenson says, I came all the way from New Zealand to watch this. Nice. Well, I hope we don't disappoint.
Yeah. You know, I that guy with the Mopars in Australia with he wanted the recipes. He finally sent me a letter, an email, and I was actually able to give him the recipes for those engines. So, and then he wanted one for 500 horse. And I said, it's the exact same setup, except for port the heads, port the intake, and 750 carb. It works. It made 515. Yes. So I do know these pumps. I don't know. I mean, I know which ones I see what you're talking about, but I don't know anything about them. They have 4 to 7 pounds, 2 to 3.5 pounds. They're like 30 gallons per hour. I don't really know anything about them, honestly. So Sorry, I can't comment on that. I don't know. Sorry.
Well, Travis Mopar Garage says, Shane, what is the best way to install a freeze plug with the engine in the car? It's a center plug on the passenger side, small block Magnum. Is that
Yes,
right
and
behind the motor mount?
yeah. Well, you got to exactly. So one right behind it, but the best way to do it, and I've actually done this in the car before. It really depends on where your exhaust manifold dumps at. If it's a center dump, obviously you got to take it off. But I've actually just taken them off and I've unbolted the mounts and then just laid it over, basically jacked up that side and just got the freeze plug away from the fender well there, and then just hammered it in and out. And literally, I did that in 15 minutes. So it was a really simple job, and I just jacked it up, moved it, and rotated it over inside the engine bay. Worked fine.
So apparently, Hook, Line, and Fishing is working on a Gasser Scion TC. He says it will be done in spring. That's pretty cool.
I like that. That is good, man.
You know, I always wanted to do like a Gasser PT Cruiser or a Gasser HHR
Prowler. I always wanted to do the Prowler. You know, like
you just can't find those.
No. I agree. You can't find them, but how cool would that be to have a Gasser Prowler? Because that's exactly what it was designed for. Was something like that, and just to have it with a big Hemi in it would be awesome. I think that'd be awesome.
Too bad they were like the Intrepid drivetrain in the rear of the car.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous engine. Yeah, it was like a V6, and it was just it was terrible.
I know. Like, what were you guys thinking? It could have been so simple at that time, because when those came out was like what, late 90s, early 2000s. So Dakota rear axle, 5-speed from a Dakota, and a 318, right?
Yeah.
How do you screw that up?
Right. Just drop it in there.
Yeah. Let's see. Travis says thanks. Mostly old parts says, what is the shelf life of a torque converter?
As long as it's got oil in it and it doesn't have rust in it and it does not open to the elements. I mean, I don't want to use the word indefinitely, but I mean, as long as it's been cleaned up and it doesn't have moisture in it, should be fine.
I'll tell you something cool I did. Okay, so the very first transmission that was in the Suburban, I don't know if you remember, I put the entire Suburban together out of leftover parts.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like whatever I had left over that was ready to go. Okay. My dad had pulled a transmission out of a car in the junkyard and had written on the bell housing, it said 73 Electra, 12,000 miles, right? Crashed in the front. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I took the tranny, like the whole transmission, I converted it to a short tail shaft to fit in that truck. And I took that same converter out of it that had like a rubber, I think it was like a rubber crutch end. You remember like the wooden crutches used to have, well, even the steel crutches or the aluminum crutches had that rubber foot on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
It was over the cap. And my dad had it in the garage since 1977. And all I did was literally put that torque converter in. Well, I put a quart of fluid in it and then dumped it all out to make sure if anything was in there, it went out. And then put another quart of fluid in it, drove it home, put it together, ran that whole entire torque converter for 3 years, 2-3 years. And then I had to change the front pump. Actually started making noise, and I took it apart, and that's when I got stupid. I bought a new torque converter. I didn't think anything about Chinesium invading torque converters, and I bought that torque converter from it's called Precision. It's not Precision Industries like the purple converters. It's like the Precision torque converters out of Iowa.
It's the red ones, right? Yeah.
No, it's blue.
Oh, the blue ones. Oh, those are like the Recon ones.
Right. Well, this one was out of a GMC 1976 GMC motorhome. I'm like, low stall sucker. It'll get better mileage this way. So I got that torque converter. I should have dropped it on the ground 4 times before I even put it in there because it was the same result, right? I put it in there, and literally 6 months later, the torque converter imploded. It broke there's some kind of retaining ring inside there that holds all the stuff in. It broke that retaining ring, and everything was just flopping around in there willy-nilly. It sounded like the the fan from the radiator got into the shroud.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the hell is that? So I'm like looking at the fan shroud. I thought maybe it broke a motor mount, no such luck. I put it in drive and I had a block on it and I had the emergency brake on and I was giving it gas from under the hood trying to figure out where the noise was. And it started coming from the bell housing. And I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me. So I called that company and they said, oh, dude, we'll warranty your torque converter, but the tranny, your SOL. And I'm like, that is bad business, guys. I mean, come on.
Right. You just destroyed half of my stuff. Perfect. Thank you.
Right. So needless to say, they kept their torque converter and I didn't even go in and try to warranty it. And
No, at that point, it's not worth it.
That's where you hooked me up with getting this switch pitch done.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, we're great. So my TCI switch pitch is doing good. Let's see. Just a speed shop. The reason I ask about the lifter aeration, my big block Chevy has a noisy valve train. I have ran the valve several times and still the same have a just down one turn. Okay.
Is it just one lifter? Is that how I'm reading this?
I'm reading it as the whole entire valve train and he went down one more turn. Okay. First off, is this a hydraulic flat tappet cam or is this a roller?
I'm assuming it's hydraulic because he was talking about hydraulic lifters. So, I mean, it really wouldn't make it a difference if the hydraulic flat tappet or roller because the same mechanisms are in both of them. One's just got a wheel, one's just flat. But
he says they all have the same adjustment. They're just down one turn. So, okay, man. There has been some horror stories and rumors that I've heard. I've never seen them, and I've never done anything with it because I find OEM lifters, and I go out of my way to get lifters made from when I was in high school or before. All right. I've heard that some of these have the bands in the wrong place, and the oil hole is not exactly lined up with where it needs to be.
Yep.
And what will happen is the lifter will never fully pump up and will never fully oil the rocker
because it's not always exposed to high oil pressure.
Right. And that is the problem that I'm hearing is that it's just low buck lifters, wrong machinists, wrong processes, no QA. I'm going to call those COVID lifters. I'm sure they are made during the COVID time frame. And but either way, if I was you and you put them out and they're still in good shape and there isn't one that's got serious concavedness and a lobe that's non-existent, I would try a different set of lifters. You're dealing with a big block Chevrolet, which has got to be the cheapest lifter on the planet.
Yeah.
All right.
I also have a couple things too. Is that does this do this all the time, or is this only like when it's hot? Because aeration would really only kind of happen when it's either hot or after a long run or so on and so forth.
Right, if you let full throttle.
Yeah, exactly, after full throttle. Or just even a long, extended, RPM, run. But if you shut it off and then you start it up and it's at idle, the aeration should essentially be alleviated within 15 seconds of that. Because it should just have, pressure in there, full pressure, and the aeration should be gone. And those things are flowing. I think factory is 3 gallons per hour through a lifter. So if there's any air in there, it's going to be gone within a few seconds. So if that is the case, then I think you have something else going on. That's just my opinion.
I'm telling you that if you're doing this, like you're talking big block Chevrolet.
Yeah.
To get to the lifters at this point, if you're worried about the noise, because it sounds like there could be something where it's not lubricating properly.
Just take the intake off and take a look.
Take the intake off, and I would look at all the lifters, and if they're all still good, take them out in order. Mm-hmm. And then what I would do is, here's my trick to how I get lifters, okay? Find the part number for like a seal powered lifter for a Chevrolet lifter. The Buicks are HT969. The Chevrolet ones are probably something similar, just maybe 1 or 2 numbers off, okay? Then what I do is I go over to Marketplace or eBay and I search that part number, okay, and then what you're looking for is a picture. If the picture comes up and it's been printed on a box by a computer, go to the next lifters, okay? Because if it's been printed on the box, it's something that's made from 2002 or later. If it is stamped on the box, hit the buy it now button regardless of what the price is.
That's funny, dude. I like that.
And if you can find a like a broken set, 14 lifters or 7 lifters or whatever, buy them suckers up if they meet those requirements, because it won't be long and you'll find another broken set and you add them all together. And here's what's going to happen. One, if it's a metallurgy issue, that metallurgy wasn't a problem in 1998. Okay. 2, if it's stamped on the box, that means it was made before a computer. So if it is a manufacturing problem that's happening now, there was no manufacturing problem in 1998. So regardless of whatever the problem with the new lifters are, those old ones are going to get it done. So if you still have a camshaft left, I would try a set of those and see if they see if that fixes it. If not, now you got 2 sets of lifters and you got to start looking at something else.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I was actually just trying to look at some pics here because I remember doing this once before. I'm pretty sure that if you take the valve cover off and the number 1 rocker, which is the number 1 for the exhaust on the number 1 side, you can get to that lifter without taking the intake off. You can just put a magnet down in there and pick that lifter out. I'm almost positive. I'm almost positive. So that way you can actually, instead of taking the intake off, you can actually just look at it really quick. There should be a few of them that you can actually look at without taking it off. I know that you can do that on some of the Mopars too. You can actually just pull them out and take a look at them.
Oh, so 38 POS Racing says that they did save the heads, the block not so much. I had one the other day. I took it to the scrapyard. It was a trade-in for the Giving It Friday 430. You know, I gave them $200 for it, and lo and behold, it was actually missing 2 pistons and rods. 2 came out of there. Like, it had half a pan and was missing 2 pistons and rods.
They left the chat. They're gone.
They're done. I've never had one so blown up that it was missing the Buick piston. It's like a tractor piston, if you ever seen one. They're like literally the most beefy piston you ever seen in your life.
Yeah.
Exited stage left. I imagine that's probably what caused all the problem. But it was missing like half of the cylinder wall, the webbing for number 4 main, and then oh god, that thing was a mess. But yeah, I got my $200 worth of parts out. I got a timing cover out of it and cylinder heads and an intake. So I'm all right.
Hey, go back down. Tesla Speed Shop. He's got another question here real quick.
Okay. It's oiling fine. Engine has 10,000 on it and runs fine. Just noisy. I've heard of a guy running them down 1.5 times.
Yeah, here's where you got to worry about running them down that far, is that you're really getting into a pivot area, because where that trunnion now is, you're running it down 1.5 here, and then now you're pivoting it down on this end, and it's not moving the valve, it's moving this area. So 1.5 here doesn't translate to, I think those things are what 40 thousandths per turn, I believe here, but what is it over here? And those things only have about 120 thousandths of actual, preload in those things that they have. So if you go 1.5 turns, you're looking at 60. By the time you add that, with the rocker arms, the 1.7 rocker arm, you're getting close to bottoming it out. Technically, yes, you could get away with it, but you're not going to really gain anything from it. The noise isn't coming from as far as the preload, because it doesn't sound like this is a race engine. Where the noise is coming from, there's a few factors. One is that everybody wants more out of camshafts nowadays. So ramp rates are through the roof. They're actually moving. The area under the curve is 10 times what it was. That's an exaggeration. It's twice as much than what it was before. And because you're trying to get it off the seat as fast as possible, and this, you're making more power, so on and so forth. But if you're opening it that fast, you're going to be closing it that fast too. So what's happening is it's extending itself and then coming down and kind of slapping on the seat, and that's where you're getting that
crashing the lifter.
Exactly. That's exactly what's happening. And also too, push rods are a lot more rigid nowadays also too, and you're probably running guide plates. So you're probably, what you're hearing is not necessarily the lifter itself. It's a combination of things making the lifter do it. One, more rigid push rods. You're going to translate a lot more of that sound with a faster ramp rate through that. It's going to be basically just like a tuning fork. When you put your little stethoscope on, it's just going to come up that. And just a lot of those things I just mentioned, that's probably what you're hearing. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's the adjustment. I just think it's a combination of all the other things.
Well, and that was so when I did the Give an F Friday 430, Shane did the camshaft for me, and I picked it up from him at No Name Nationals. I came home, slapped it in, got that motor all together. I broke it down the start stand. That was the one thing that I did notice, is it had lifter tick, what I thought was lifter tick. And then when I called him, he said, "No, you're getting that, you're getting a crash because it's got so much ramp rate in it that it's on the back side of the lobe. It is crashing down." And
there's no free lunch. There's no free lunch. You're gonna it's either gonna be quiet or it's gonna be fast. And if it's fast, it's gonna be noisy.
I was gonna take noisy any day of the week as long as it didn't freaking eat them up. So
yeah, that's right.
So let's see what else we got here. All right, Craig Chitto is asking, Dallas, are you doing different mini bike classes at No Name Nationals this year? All right, so I don't like to do No Name Nationals questions here on the weekly Tech Talk. I'll answer this one for you because we haven't done an update with John. We're going to be doing an update with John here soon. But we're going to run the same mini bike class, essentially your monkey bike challenge, right? But there will be a couple of revised rules, just so that it looks, it gives you a little bit more leeway to play with things. Okay. The problem was that people weren't reading the gray areas and attacking them like I thought they would, because that's what racers do. The thing is, I forgot that majority of the No Name Nationals participants aren't really racers; they're enthusiasts, right? And so they won't really attack in the rules like I thought they would. So I didn't loosen them. I just gave you a little bit of nudge to let you know what you could do and what you couldn't do. Because that's what a racer will do. The racer, they got a mind that thinks like that, and they will go up to the line, essentially where the line is at, where the line is drawn, saying you cannot do this, right?
Yeah,
they will be up to that line, and that's something that they're always looking for. So, yes, we're going to be running the same classes, the same monkey bike class. The rules are relatively close. It just has a little bit more leeway, and I think there's a couple more places in there that it's explained better.
Well, tell them what time you guys talk about it. I think it's this Friday, right? Talk about that.
It is Friday. Yeah. So I'm going to be live on John Wilburn's channel on Friday. I want to say it's 9:00.
I always get confused, man.
I do too, because it's the East Coast and I'm in the Central Time Zone. I want to say
John, what is it?
It's 7 my time and 8 Eastern time. That's what it is, I think.
Yeah, who knows? Because I try to tune in, it seems like I'm always late. It's like, man, I missed it. What's going on here? Yeah.
All right, Mopar Man 1978. I'm thinking of buying a $50 complete but wore out Jeep XJ 4.0 from Facebook Marketplace, 8 miles away. Would like to rebuild it so we have a backup motor for my 96 XJ.
Okay. I know quite a bit about this. I do know a lot about this stuff. Now, there's 2 versions of these 4.0s. Now, when it was still Jeep, when it was a Jeep 4.0, that was 1990. Oh, man, I can't believe I just brain farted on this. I think it was 99. And then after that, it became a Chrysler 4.0. And they had different camshafts. And I know this very well because we had to regrind the Chrysler ones, but then the Jeep ones we actually had. So I would try to find the earlier version personally. because you can still get camshafts for them. You can still buy a performance camshaft for them, but the Chrysler ones at that time, you couldn't find them. But I say go for it, man. Now 4.0, man, they make these things in strokers, and they run well. They make tons of torque.
I like that there was a Banks made like a turbo kit or a supercharger kit for one of those, and one of them with an Edelbrock head with a stroker kit would just be a freaking animal.
Yeah,
I mean, God, it'd be probably like almost 5 liters with a turbo on it. Could you imagine the mid-range torque that stupid thing would have? I mean, they're pretty torquey as is.
Mm-hmm.
God, it'd just be nuts with all those main bearings that can handle it all day long.
I've actually seen them like this in the desert. They would be going up the sand dunes, and the guy he had a Jeep Cherokee. The one that's kind of like the unibody, so it's a really light Jeep. He had a stroker. I think it was a 4.7 Edelbrock head on it. It was NA, but man, that thing sounded like an animal going up the hill. It was just great. It was going up the sand dunes. And those things are light, super light. So yeah, it was awesome.
So 38 POS Racing. When you have time, what's the recommendation for new flat tappet lifter on a slightly used 4.3 Chevy Marine cam? You can use a new lifter on an old cam. That's not a problem. And
as long as the camshaft as long as the going over the top of the lobe isn't completely flat, like it still has some wear on it, like when you rotate it. Yeah, it still has a slight taper on it. Then yeah, just break it in like you would a normal cam.
Yeah. If you listen to anything that I said earlier about that, how I find lifters, that's exactly how I would do that 4.3 liter. I'd go find myself 12 lifters, preferably made before 2002. That's how I do it. So, yeah. And I have not, fingers crossed, had a camshaft failure. So, okay, so here's John saving my bacon here. This Friday, 1/13, we will have a No Name Nationals update with AHRA tech official Deke Denny on my channel. 7
p.m. Central. That's 6 my time. That's why I'm always late.
Yeah, it's not 6 your time. It's 7 p.m. Central. You're in.
Oh, it's 7 my time. Oh, yeah. I'm on. That's right. I am on Central. Okay, so it's 8 his time. That's okay. Not screwed up. Why can't it just be Pacific Standard Time anymore? I know that Central Time always screwed up on it.
It's 2 hours earlier than. Yeah. So John is an hour earlier than us. So it'd be 8 o'clock. And that's where I always screw it up. Is like, it's 8 his time, 7 my time, but it screws me all up, man. All right. So Kurt Tank, Dallas, what is the better carb combination for my boat? One large Holly or a dual quad? Smaller Holly 4-barrel.
Well,
for your boat.
Yeah, this is where we get into those things. What are you doing with the boat? Is this a cruiser? It's a cruiser. I do a single. I had a tunnel ram on our jet boat, and I had twin Edelbrocks on it. And then I had twin Predators on it, and that's when I had the AB impeller. When I went back to an A impeller, I just put a single Holly on it. And it ran better. It was actually more usable power.
I was actually going to say, like, okay, really for boat combination, either one of them is going to work for you. Either one is going to work fine. But I'm looking at it like this. Okay, and Shane reminded me of this, maybe a week or two ago. The boat, when it gets up on plane, it just stays at that RPM virtually the whole day, right? Now, I could see with a tunnel ram and 2 4-barrels, you getting fuel twice as much and really not much gain out of it.
No.
Right? That's what I think. I think it's probably better to do the one large Holly and
stay on the primaries. Just stay on the primaries as you're cruising. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it would actually do better.
Yeah. No, I've been there. I've done them both. When I lived in the Imperial out there in San Diego, we would put in at Squaw Lake. On the river, and then we would go up to Lake Martinez, and then we would go from there over to, we call it Silicon Island, but it was basically just a little. It's basically right there by the sandbars, And that is a 12-mile trip, and I would burn 25 gallons of fuel with a Ford.
Well, we're screwed now. I just had an idea. You know how California's getting all that rain?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if I told you this. Is it Lake Elsinore? Is that the one in between LA and San Diego?
Yes.
Okay. That thing got so dried up that you could literally walk out to the center of it. And the guys were finding boats that had sunk 20 years before and stuff like that. Well, supposedly, see, when General Motors was huge, they made a dual quadrijet, a twin quadrijet dual quad intake manifold for a 430 Buick, and they were testing it. And on the boat that it was on, it sank in Lake Elsinore. And I'm like, there was only 2 of those intake manifolds made. One of them exists. The other one is at the bottom of Lake Elsinore, right?
Okay.
And I thought, oh man, with all that water receding, I could go out there and get that freaking intake manifold, right? And then, but now with all the water that's come in there, you're never going to get back to it, right?
No.
So I guess those days have passed.
Can't get your mystery, you know what I mean? The unicorn, your unicorn intake, you know, it's gone.
Yeah. And what's funny is, like, it was the year that they made the big block Buick. It came out in 67. So they were testing this intake manifold on a boat in 66, and it sank.
Yeah.
It would be so cool to run in like that Sega Superstock series, because they said you can use a dual quad intake manifold as long as it's a dual plane. Well, okay, who makes a dual quad intake manifold for a big block Buick? Offenhauser. Is it a dual plane? No, it's a single plane. Big, what is it? That 360 Portasonic thing or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you can't use it, right? But if you had the one factory intake manifold, it meets those rules.
Perfect. It works.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I fit right in the class. Okay, so let me catch up here. Max Wedge Dick Dastardly asked Shane, what do you think about, I think would be better, 1.6 rockers on a 520 lift cam, or a lift of 600 over a factory, maybe I'm reading this wrong, or a lift 600 cam over the factory 520 lift Max Wedge cam 426. Oh, he's talking about using the stock rockers or changing the rocker arms.
Yeah. So a 520, divide that by 1.5, that comes out to 346.66. Then let's multiply that times 1.6. So you're basically gaining about 34 thousandths of actual lift at the valve. That's really nothing. Yeah. It's nothing. Exactly. And that's the thing. If you're going to make a change, make a big change, and you're only going to gain as far as duration, I believe. Oh, me and Billy talked about this one time. We were laughing about it, but it's like a degree up and back. I think it's a half a degree or something like that. As far as that's what you're gaining at 50 with the rock arms, and it really comes down to ramp rates. But you're not really gaining much unless your cylinder head flows a lot more air in that 30,000
range.
Yeah, then it's worth it.
I doubt it's huge numbers between 520 and 550.
Exactly. So you're not going to gain much. The only thing you're going to gain is that is at the 300 numbers. Like I tell everybody, at the 300 numbers, you're going to get there a little sooner. So you're going to see a little bit of power because of that. Is it measurable? Are you going to feel it in your butt? It's going to be hard to tell, but you're not really going to gain much at that point.
That's where you just throw the 600 lift cam at it.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was just going to say. At that point, if your heads flow more air at 600 than they do and what I mean by more is not just 1 or 2 numbers, but substantial. You're going to want at least 30 or 40 CFM. Then it makes sense. You just don't want to lift it for no reason, especially if the airflow stalls. If you get, like, say, let's just make an arbitrary number. At 520, you're making 300 CFM, and at 600, you're making 305. It's not worth it. You're not going to gain anything. In fact, it's going to stall.
It might go backwards. Yeah.
Exactly, because the velocity now has stopped happening. You know, I mean, the CFM's still there, but the acceleration of the air has stopped. So you're basically, air is slowed down, and now it's got to ramp back up. So I would say you're just wasting money at that point. So Just find out where the heads flow, and lift really only comes down to where the heads flow. That's what I don't even look at lift until I know what the heads flow, and I look at each step. And when I design a cam for someone, I'm really doing duration at 50 and the load separation angle, and then we start looking at where are we going to lift this thing, what's it's going to be used for, as far as like what kind of rock arms we're going to be doing, and then we start looking at that kind of stuff. I hope that answers the question.
I think that answers it.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sure he was following it. Yeah, I think he hit the nail on the head there.
Awesome.
Okay. Let's see. Big Belly Racing popped in here.
Kurt Tank's got one for you.
That's the one I just... Isn't that the same one I just did?
Oh.
What's a better carb combination for my boat?
Oh, yeah, it is. Oh, you went back the other direction. Okay.
No, I didn't go back.
Oh. Then he posted that again then.
Maybe he posted it again. Let's see. Correction. Dallas Shaney, it's a 96 4.0 Jeep motor. And it says engine ran but quit after it overheated. No compression on cylinder 2. I'd stay away from that sucker.
Done. Don't even mess with it. Yeah. See you later. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Generally, when those big inline motors, when they get hot, a lot of them warp ahead because there's so much damn head there to warp.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the only way to get it is if you're looking for a project that you want to see if you can save just for funsies, or put it on your channel to see, can we make this thing survive? Other than that, if you're trying to get it to like, hey, let's make this thing work and let's make some power and put it in my Jeep, I wouldn't do it. Sorry.
I'm not entirely sure what Craig Chitta was asking me here. Can you run dual, maybe quadrajets on a tunnel ram? And when putting the primaries of the rear carb to the back, do anything? If it's a tunnel ram and it's a true tunnel ram, that means it's going to be sharing plenum volume. So the quadrajets are they're progressive linkage, and I'm sure it would work just like any other. Primaries of the rear carb to the back. I don't think it would do anything different. It's still going to share plenum volume.
Yeah, but you would have the primaries with two primaries on the outer edges. You would have probably a lean area in the center until it came on, and then you would have a rich mixture in the center.
Big secondaries.
Yeah, because you wouldn't.
Or maybe the other way. Maybe it would be super lean then because you got those big secondaries open.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the way it's set up, with the primaries facing forward or both facing rear, because at that point it really wouldn't make a difference. I think that because of the staggering, it would help it out, but obviously you're still going to have, field distribution problems of some sort because it's not really evenly spaced. But, when you're dealing with a tunnel ram anyways, it doesn't matter if it's a square carburetor. We've seen it. And anyone who watches any of these YouTube channels, you can see that when you have a tunnel ram, they're all going to be jetted wildly different because the corners are going to be the hardest ones to get fuel, where the ones in the center are sharing fuel. So you're going to be really defueling in the center and upfueling in the corners is what I tend to see. That's the trend.
And that maybe make it easier if you had a quadrajet with the primaries facing the outer edges, right? Because you can jet those individually.
Really?
You can change metering lines on them. You can jet them individually. Yeah.
Well, then it might work. Then that would probably be a good idea.
I think it might work, but I don't know if there's I'm sure I can find a tunnel ram to put two quadrajets on. I just don't know if it's something that would fit my application, or if I just have to make one. Maybe that's where I need to get into a sheet metal intake manifold and just make one to fit two quadrajets and find out what happens.
Did you know? I think the next thing I'm going to buy myself is I got one of those Hobart. Yeah, I'm going to buy, well, not necessarily a TIG weld. I might buy one of those little spool wheels, for that you can weld aluminum with, or I might just buy a TIG welder. But that way I can start messing with making my own aluminum intakes.
That's exactly what I want to do. So
yeah,
the What If 300, I got to cut it all up, right? I got to cut the intake manifold off. But the first thing is I need to take the intake manifold and cut 3/16 off the bottom of it. I know it's going to sound weird. A lot of people probably would be like, "What? Are you on drugs?" But I got to cut 3/16 off the bottom of it, and then because that intake manifold that I bought for it, which is a TA Performance single plane SP3, is meant to fit a 350 Buick, and it has a deck height of 10.25 inches, and the 300 has a 9.5 inch deck height. So that intake manifold is going to be too wide, so I have to cut it down. So the best thing to do is I first plane 3/16 off the bottom, and that way I can use the sides to capture a new lifter valley for the 300 Buick that's made of 3/16 aluminum. And then I can put the gasket under there, and I put the 3/16 aluminum, and then I put the side pieces on it, and then I get my spool gun out, and I shave the sides of what's left of the plenum, and then I weld that on to the pieces that I have cut. It's going to be the ugliest, probably the most gaudy looking thing ever, and if it works, I'll be amazed, but I hope it does. But that's what I got to get to.
Yeah, that's what I want to try. Is I want to start making some, some Slant 6 intakes. You know what I mean? Like now that I have these three throttle bodies that are single, 2 barrels, right? I mean, that would be kind of cool to make my own, intake that I could just play around with.
Well, what's cool with that one would be almost like an individual runner setup,
Yeah,
where you can tune each individual injector with a Holley EFI, and you could give it its own pulse length. Like say, number one's fat. Okay, well, I'm going to lean it out. Number one only.
And then I'll get the benefit of having the injector far away to get the cooling effect down the runner. And that's the reason why carburetors make more power technically than like say fuel injection, where the injector's right at the port, is because you're going to get the cooling effect of the fuel down the thing. So that's what I wanted to see, is like, will it make more power than if I inject it right at the valve, if I put it all the way back here and just shove it in there?
So you remember my T-Bird is EFI, right?
Yep.
Okay. I had this ingenious idea, which I thought was ingenious at the time, and I never made it happen. I should have.
I saw the light go off in your head while I was talking, and I knew this was going to be a good one. Go for it.
Okay, so when NHRA came out with fuel injection on the Pro Stocks, the Pro Stock guys were doing it just like a factory fuel injected car, and then they realized that if you put the injectors up high, right, that you could actually get the atomization and cooling effect that you get from a carburetor, right? And it drops the temps in the intake runner, and the thing makes more power. Well, I thought, I already got my power. Right. Well, I got my intake or my injectors down low, right? It's the same way. I made mine. I had mine made before any of this technology came out. I had it all down low, just like it does in a factory intake manifold, and it runs good. I mean, there's no doubt about that. It runs good. But I'm like, you know what? This Holley HP that I have will run 16 injectors. What would have happened if I took a 1-inch spacer and I put it on a tunnel ram setup, right? And I had 2 throttle bodies, and on that 1-inch, what do those spacers cost? Aluminum spacer shaped like a 4150, $40.
Yeah, nothing.
Right?
Yeah.
All right. So I drill into the side of it 2 spots for a fuel injector on, well, it'd be 4 total on each spacer. And then you just go to the junkyard and get yourself some cheap, like 19 or 24 pound per hour injectors out of like a Ford truck, right? Stick them in there, and then it would have the atomizing effects, but then your major fuel distribution would be happening down at the bottom. Would you have the benefits of both?
Yes, you would. I should say, I can only say so much, but I can tell you right now that this has been done, and running 2 injectors is light years better, and keeping one higher, and then basically you run, when you're driving around, you run the one that's right at the valve, and then when you're driving around town, and when you get up on the sauce, you get and then you turn on the top one also, and so that way you get the benefit of both. You cool down the air, and then you're using that fuel, and then that way you can fine tune it. So, and then that way you can run, like say 2 36 pounders or 2 34 pounders.
Right. Then, I just thought about it like this, like, okay, I got 42 pounders in mine now, and that's good for 650 horsepower. But if I want to go more than 650 horse, I'm buying another set of injectors. Or in this case, I'm just putting another set of injectors that'll support another 200 horsepower up at the top,
Yep.
right? And problem solved. And they cost me $83 at the junkyard, right? And all I had to do is figure out how to make a fuel rail. But it can't be that complicated because you can buy the individual fuel rails that are already kind of like,
Yeah.
it's just a rail, but it has no injector openings in it. And you just
Uh-huh.
drill those the same as you drilled your intake manifold up top. I just thought that'd be freaking genius.
Yeah, they sell those bungs and you can weld them in. And I was going to work on something like that for my Gen 3 Hemi. When I start messing with it, I was going to put 2 injectors on it.
I don't think you have to have the bungs, right? You just take that aluminum 1-inch billet spacer and just drill a hole in it.
Yeah, put a hole in it. Yeah, I was going to do the exact same thing for my Gen 3 Hemi. So that way, when I'm driving it around, I can have small injectors, and they're not turned way down. They're actually running, because when you start cycling, really, you're running them at like say 20 or 30%. The idle gets bad. But this way, they're running it. Yeah, they're running.
They're not really atomizing the fuel. Yeah,
exactly.
They blob fuel in.
Yeah, so this way you have a small injector that's working it decently to drive it around, but that way still atomizing the fuel. But then when you turn on the beans, you turn on the top ones, and then it's good to go.
Flip them around. I could just flip them around. I think that's an interesting thing to do. I'd really like to try it out. Maybe I should get my T-Bird out and play with it some more then. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to be putting mine. I was going to be putting ones down, basically, at the valve, and then I was going to be putting another ones on the either in front of the blower, or so that way when it goes through the blower it cools it, or underneath it.
Look at this guy. The Wheelie King says, I'm generally a Mopar truck guy. Naturally, most engine donors for me are big C bodies or motorhomes. I save all converters for that exact reason, the Chinesium factor.
I like that. It's good.
Let's see.
Oh, wow. You're way back there.
Yeah, I am probably. I'm trying to catch up right now. And I'm reading Sand Mountain Ballistics is dropping a whole bunch of knowledge on somebody. Which I think that's Dakota's brother. Dakota's Timeout's brother.
No. I'm going through them real quick and see if I can see something. Oh, so basically, okay, that's good. You can start that, yeah.
Yeah, Craig Chitto saying, yes, Welder has a cheap AC TIG 550 to 650 on sale.
Yeah. See, I was looking for something that was going to be, like under $1,000, that way I could start welding some stuff on my own, that's aluminum. I've watched some videos on them, like how hard could it be?
Kurt Tank's asking, would a Holly Dominator work better than an 850 double pumper on marine application?
No, 850 double pumper all day long. I've already done the Dominator thing. Especially if you have a 3-circuit. If you had a 2-circuit Dominator, it might work a little better, because especially if it's a jet boat, it's either idling
or wide
open, and the Dominator is just going to eat that fuel. Really, it's going to eat it. And I'm not really sure your boat, like if it's we had an open bow, I think it was a 21-foot Ultra, a shallow V, and it just ate it. So it only had 25-gallon tanks in it.
Well, there you go. Try out that 850 double pumper. Me personally, I'm a big fan of vacuum secondary carburetors, and that's because, man, they just get so much better fuel economy. And when you're talking boating, that is, the more time you can spend on the water, the better, right? You already went through all the pain in the butt, which is unloading the boat and getting all the stuff in there and packing the lunches and getting the kids out there. And that, why stop for fuel 3-4 times?
Yeah.
Okay, so mostly old parts and rust is saying my suggestion is an Alpha TIG from eBay for a TIG welder.
Really?
I need to take a class. I'm going to go take a class that teaches me how to TIG weld. I'm a self-taught MIG welder, but I learned on stick, right? And that's what I learned to do with stick welding. I don't know if I've ever told you my growing up on a farm. Well, not really growing up on a farm. I lived in town. My grandfather had a farm, and we would he would pay me money to weld up the discs for his plow, right? For his disc, and they didn't make the discs any longer. So he's like, I know where I can get some discs. And he looked at me and he looked at a box of welding rod costs a lot less than discs that you can't get. And he just threw me at him and paid me $10 for each one that I finished. Right. And I literally would weld up this disc in a circle, just keep going around in a circle and around in a circle and around in a circle until you built this disc up from like, say, 2 foot to 4 foot. Right. And then grind it down. And that was my teenage years, was doing that. That's how I learned how to stick weld.
You know that while you were talking there, I was listening to you, and I always do multiple things here. I went and looked at this Alpha TIG 203 XI 200 amp, and that thing will weld up to 1/4 inch aluminum and 3/8 mild steel, 110 and 220 volts, and it's capable of welding 70-18 and 60-13. Wow.
Huh.
I don't know. Might be something to look at. I don't know. Sorry.
Which one is that?
That's the Alpha TIG.
Alpha TIG, huh? Well, I might have to check it out. I need to do something with this cast aluminum. I'm sure it's not, what did you say, 7180? But,
right. The type of steel. Yeah, well, the 60-13 is really what you want to be looking at. That's going to be the style of aluminum. And then your most cast aluminum is going to be like is it 356 or something like that. You know, that's going to be your pourable aluminum.
Huh. Well,
Really
Michael Schmidt's here saying, Holly 4150, been using standard rebuild kit on my big block Chevy 454. Each year I have to rebuild because accelerator pumps are hard as a rock. Is there a benefit to using the green accelerator pumps? I'll tell you what, which one's for E85? That's the one I would be using for today's day and age. Those things are meant for methanol or ethanol actually ethanol, right? But they'll take the 10 to 20% of ethanol you're going to find in any gas pump in the United States at this point.
Yeah. I think those are the green ones. The green ones are the E85 ones.
Okay, well, that's the ones I would use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I didn't say anything at first. I was like, man, I think the green ones are. Yeah, so the green ones are the E85s and the black ones. At least that's what the Googles are saying here. But I remembered that myself, so that the green is the E85 one.
And you're talking to the wrong guy when you're talking Holly. If me, I have owned one Holly my whole life, and that's the one on the super stock motor. I've never owned one. I've never had. I'm telling you, man, that if you were a Buick fan, which most of the stuff is factory parts, you were Quadrajet all the way, and really? I'm good at them. Yeah.
If it's racing, I'm Holly. If it's on the street, I'm an Edelbrock. Until we came up with the VRS carburetor. The VRS is awesome.
So mostly old parts and Russ says, Dallas, that's how Mike Finnegan has his injectors on Blasphemy on the top of the blower.
Yeah, he's got 2 sets of injectors.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, he's got ones down below for driving around, and another set that go up on top.
Huh.
It's a thing. A lot of people do that kind of setup.
Oh crap! JB saying just dropped in, headed back to bed. The flu sucks. He's homesick. So everybody send some good thoughts over to JB so he can get back out there and sharpen some saws, because that's what he does for a living. If you didn't know that, that's a pretty interesting living. I've never met anybody that sharpened saws before, but he does these specialty blades and stuff. So,
well, I've been having a cold sickness ish since Christmas.
Yeah, so. You got it from the PRI, man. I'm telling you, they got some kind of thing that runs around there.
Yeah.
Jason's garage says, "Howdy, fellers. Been out in the garage working on the old family truckster.
Ooh,
Probably just the truckster he's bringing to the." It's bringing to No Name Nationals. Okay. Yeah. Let's see here. Okay. Trying to catch up right now. Let's see. Mostly Old Parts and Rust says we have several Alpha TIG units running around here. One is even in a fab shop.
Yeah. They look popular. It says #1 seller. it always gives you, like, I was reading some of the reviews as, looks decent. I mean, I don't even know what I'm looking for in a TIG welder. I really know nothing about them, so I don't know. I'm just going to watch some YouTube videos. That's why I love YouTube. You can just watch some YouTube videos. What do you like? What do you don't like? Okay, well, I can live with that.
You should see the one. Okay. I watched. I didn't watch anything. Well, I ended up watching something, but so this 63 Buick Special I'm working on has its own little intricacies. Motor mounts you can't get, transmission mounts you can't get, upper and lower control arm bushings you can't get. And I started having this. I had this dream last because it was bothering me when I went to bed. And I had a dream last night that I was actually busting up bowling balls and taking the pieces and making bushings out of them. And I'm like, you know what? I wonder what they make a bowling ball out of. So I looked it up, and it's made of completely of urethane, right? Essentially an epoxy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, then that took me down the rabbit hole of, can I make my own bushings? Can I make my own mounts? Can I take my own, stuff together? Because, yeah. So I found that I'm going to make my own upper and lower control arm bushings out of polyurethane.
I've seen that. In fact, that's how I got the idea when it's funny because I did the exact same thing. I went down that rabbit hole with bowling balls, and when I was putting the concrete in my block, because I didn't like that it had solid motor mounts on it. And so then I started looking at it. I was like, oh, you can buy this urethane. I can pour this. I can do that. And I made my own motor mounts. I literally mixed up the epoxy in the garage in Southern California, and I made mounts that were basically locked together. They were steel to steel, but it had just a little hook like this. And I put a little polyurethane in there, so if it failed, it would still grab, but it definitely helped out. So it's just funny because I knew where you were going with this because I did the exact same thing.
Well, I'm going to do it, man. I'm going to make my own damn motor mounts. I'm going to make my up and lower control arm bushings because you can't buy. Well, all right, you can. I got this buddy. He's got a 62 Special, and he has the engine that I built called Jack the Giant Killer. It's a 308 cubic inch small block Buick, and it is mean. But the first time he ever stood on it, he called me. He said, man, can you help me get the chassis sorted out? It's going left and then right and then left and then right. And I'm like, well, what do you got on it for suspension? He's like, the stock stuff. And I'm like, it shouldn't be going left and right because it's a triangulated 4-link, right? Something doesn't sound right. I said, you need to check the tires and see if they're both spinning, right? Like, did it break a spool? Does it have a posi in it that's just going to crap? Something. So he calls me back. I don't see anything wrong. So I said, man, I'd recommend taking it to a chassis guy and have him look over the suspension because I wonder if it's been all cobbled together, right? It was built in the 60s. Well, he calls me back the other day and said, hey, it has no lower control arm bushing. It fell out. And I'm like, well, that would be it because that sucker's walking around like a monster truck getting with rear steer, right? So then he calls me the next day and he says, hey, you won't believe this, but I called Cantor Auto Parts. Is the only place that sells bushings for these little cars, replacement bushings. He said 4 bushings, guess. And I'm like, well, I have no idea. Maybe $85, $100, right? He's like $480 for these bushings. Yeah. And I said, you still got the stuff from the other one? He said, yeah, but it's got no rubber in it. And that's where I started thinking about, I wonder if you could just recenter that the sleeve in the center and then just pour some polyurethane in it. Well, come to find out, there's people that's doing that.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, you know what? This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to fix this damn Buick bushing problem where it's $480 for 4 bushings. It's about to be $25 for 4 bushings because it costs nothing if you already own the pieces for the bushing. The only thing that's fallen out is the rubber.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give it a whirl.
You started a business. You just now started your own business.
Well, I already have one, but and it's gonna. Maybe I need to start this other one so I can support the first one. But I don't know. All right. Hey, dude, we're way past 8 o'clock. Shane and I were going to do a hardcore tech thing for you guys. I'll answer Nicholas R's question first, or we'll get some answers for it. I'm looking at a turbo hydromatic 400 that shoots oil out the dipstick tube when put into park. The vent is clear, so I was thinking either pump gasket or a spun bushing oil hole not lining up. Y'all have any ideas?
I personally have never heard of that one. That's a new one for me.
Okay, I have one. There's a one-way check valve in there that's supposed to stop oil from draining back from the converter when you shut it off, right? I'm wondering if that check ball was truly bad. When you go from drive to park, it goes from loaded converter to non-loaded converter. I wonder if that is forcing oil up through into, it would essentially just be into the pan. Does that sound like it could make sense, Shane?
Yeah, I mean that could make sense, but usually it's going to be the breather. But he said the breather is, but that's the first thing I would go to is the breather is, excuse me, is clogged, and that the fluid's overfilled, so it's building pressure and shooting out. But man, that's with it being unclogged. Man, I don't know. I just sometimes I just Google it when there's this random ones, but it looks like it's a thing. But everyone's saying that it's going to be a clogged vent tube. Yeah. So I really don't know. You know what? Send me an email. I'll find out for you. I know people that would probably know this.
Actually, I know what to do on this. He's saying the vent is clear, right? I'll tell you what I would do. If everybody's saying the vent, pull the dipstick out, climb up there with some compressed air, and cram that shit into the vent.
And see if it comes out.
Yeah, air should be coming out the vent or out the dipstick tube when you take the dipstick out, right? Mm-hmm. And if it does come out, hey, okay, now it's free and clear. And you were saying it was clear before, but I don't know how you checked it, but I would put some compressed air into it. Really would.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. So Tista's Speed Shop is saying that isn't the Corvair the same front suspension? I'm talking about the bushings in the rear, upper and lower control arms, 4 bushings in the rear, and that's what was $480. And then Michael Schmidt says $480 canter seems always to be silly high. That seems to be ridiculous high. Like I could see $150, because that's like 100% markup for what it should cost. $480. I'm about to run them out of business with a couple bottles of polyurethane. So
sell them for half. People would be stoked. And you make a little money.
40 polyurethane bushing. Now your other bushings that are $480 couldn't even compete.
Yeah,
polyurethane would just murder them.
That's right. Put it in like emboss like AHRA right on them or something like that. That'd be awesome.
Dallas's bushings. I'm gonna make them out of the same way that they made the Load and Reload albums for Metallica. That's how they make it. I'm not going to say it on here. If you don't know how those albums covers were made, go look them up.
Yeah.
It's disgusting in its own right. Okay, but the hardcore tech that Shane and I were going to discuss was oil volume versus oil pressure.
Yes.
Okay.
What's funny about this is that we talked about this randomly, and it's funny because we both came to the exact same conclusion in 2 different ways. I'll explain mine real quick, and then I'll let you explain yours. And it's funny because we both arrived at doing the exact same way, at the same time ish. So for me, how it was is when I was a small block Mopar guy, and I was getting these things out of the wrecking yard, and I was running stock oil pumps. And I was never really doing anything beyond that because I was never really RPMing them. When I started putting the juice on things, I started putting the high volume pumps on. And as soon as I put a high volume pump on, it was a high volume, high pressure pump, I started having camshaft failures. And I was only really getting the camshaft failures basically on the passenger side. And all the lifters were essentially going bad. And they would start at like, say, number 8, and then they would work up. And it was always starting out like that. And one day I noticed that I was like basically hydro-locking lifter. I know I talked about this before. But then when I started to to notice is that once I started to drop, when I was putting high volume into something, and then I was able to drop the pressure, it took less power to turn the drill. And how I found this out is I was actually testing how much pull it was taking to do these lifters, and then I kept dropping the pressure. And it's funny because Dallas had the same thing. I had a clutch on. I had a Black & Decker drill and had a little clutch setting on it. Excuse me, sorry, I still have a cold. And it would click, 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 click. But mine only had 2 settings. Mine didn't have his settings. And so I was able, once I started to get the pressure down and I started opening up and sending oil to other areas, like I was actually bypassing the oil pump going to the front, to the back, and in back feeding oil, I was able to drop the pressure because I already had the volume. And that way also too, I was taking way less power. I noticed that personally, I was taking a lot less power to turn the pump and moving the exact same amount of oil. I made that brief so that way Dallas can talk about his story, but that's how I found mine out. All right, go ahead, bud.
Well, mine was kind of the same way. I was modifying the oiling systems on the Buicks because they were already hindered, right? The first few Buick engines I did in my garage virtually were stock oil systems. And what I would do is I put my priming tool in there and I put my drill on it, and then I would spin it. And when I originally would just prime the engines, I would put them on a set like speed of 1 and then spin the drill. And of course, they would pump the oil pump, and you'd have, let's say, 50, 60 pounds of oil pressure, and everything would work just as designed. Okay. But when I got into modifying the Buick oiling systems, the first one I really did was Jack the Giant Killer 300. And I went through the entire front to back. I made it as big as I possibly could for the suction side, radiused all the turns, all 90 degrees, from 90 degrees to like 45. And then you open up the passages to the maximum you possibly could. When I did that, I decided, okay, well, I need to have a pump on here that can support all that. So I put a high volume pump without the high pressure. So because the Buick, they don't come with, like, you don't buy a high volume, high pressure oil pump. You buy a high volume oil pump kit, and then you change the spring in it to make the pressure high. The oil pump is actually located on the timing cover, right? So it's like an AMC kind of. So what I did is I made this Jack the Giant Killer's 300 pretty robust oiling system. But when I did that and I put it all together, and the first time I primed it, I put my drill on a setting of 1, and it would spin it, but it would like have very little pressure, right? And I'm like, wow, this is kind of weird. So I spun it. I went to speed of 2, and I could spin it at speed of 2. And if the oil was thick or the day was cold, it would start slipping the clutch a little bit, right? And what I really, noticed was, now that I've done, like, say, the big blocks and really opened the big blocks up and really opened the timing covers up, I can get the drill up to a setting of 3 on full throttle. If I don't whack it right off the beginning, if I just slowly kind of creep into it, I will get the drill up to a speed of 3, and it will not slip the clutch. And what that tells me is that it takes less power to turn that pump.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the clutch itself is going to give up at so much torque on the clutch. That's where the clutch starts slipping at, is whatever the torque setting is on the clutch, right? And if all of them have the same torque setting, hands down, the one in the speed of 3 is the one that is kind of keys me in on this. That you're taking so much less power away from, because to drive that pump takes horsepower.
A lot.
And when you're looking at parasitic loss in an engine, the most places that people focus are like the rings and the bearings and tolerances. I'll tell you right now, if you didn't even focus on the rings, bearings, tolerances, any of that stuff, and went right to the oil pump, I bet you could glean the most power out of the oil pump than you could anything else on there, right?
Mine was 15 horsepower. For me, it was 15.
I bet it probably is 15 to 20 horse. Easy. And that's a hell of a lot of power just to be losing on something. You're already going to turn it. Why not make it efficient? Right?
Yeah.
It's kind of how I'm looking at it. So that's my 2 cents, and that's, I guess, the hardcore tech for this evening. But,
Yeah, and I got a little add on to this is that there was a gentleman that he asked me a question. His name is Jim, and he's out in Australia, and I gave him one of my Mopar recipes on here, and I've given this out to a few people, and there's been actually Jim didn't ask this, and I'm not going to tell you the name of the person, but he keeps asking me, why do I put oil pump and then I have on there stock replacement? Is because you're really only turning this thing to 6,200 RPM, and the factory pump was good. That thing was designed to go to 6,000 RPM. In fact, that was part of their ad. The Mopar said 340 can go to 6,000 RPM shifts. And this, the only way I'm getting this horsepower out of these cams, the setup, 462 horsepower out of a 360 with basically Edelbrock Magnum heads, aluminum heads, is because of this oil pump. This is the biggest factor. This would just be a 440 horse type of engine, but where I'm getting that extra power and making that mark is because of that oil pump savings. That I'm not just throwing all that power away by turning an oil pump that's just bypassing anyways.
And see, I heard this years ago from when I was running small block Fords, 302 Ford. We were trying to find every single little horsepower you could to run. They used to have a factory stock class for the NMRA. NMRA ran a factory stock class. So I was building a factory stock motor about 1999, and I used all the basic, like everybody was doing TRW forged pistons out of the 89 Mustang. You go to the Ford dealer, you buy a set over the counter, and hey, I got the healthiest pistons I could get, factory part number. Me, I went right for the Explorer junk, right? Because it was a high protected piston that meant it was a tighter wall clearance. It's a lighter piston than that TRW forged. And then the simple thing was you find a decent set of rods and you find the lightest ones you can, right? Like, so you'd buy 25 sets of 5-liter Ford rods. You'd weigh all 25 sets and you take the 8 lightest out of all those. And that's what you'd use, right? You put a good set of ARP rod bolts in them. But the thing was, I'd run a bone stock oil pump, right? And then ARP make an oil pump shaft for a small block Ford for a 302, but they also used to make like this chromoly hollow centered one, right? And chromoly, if you know anything about chromoly, it's like it's strong and it's lightweight, but it is brittle, right?
Snap.
And
yeah.
The thing is, the torque number that it would make that snap at was like some stupid number that would almost twist the oil pump off the block anyway, right? So it's like, hey, you get this lightweight shaft, but anyway, we were running stock oil pumps, and then you would take them apart and blueprint them, okay? And the other thing was, you take inside there is it's got like a freeze plug, like a expansion plug in one side. If you take that out, there's a spring in there, and that spring equates to what your regulated pressure is at. And you'd go inside there, you take that spring out, and then you'd get like a 2.3 Pinto spring, right? And it's like it looks about like the one that came out of your Ford 302, but it's literally like a half an inch shorter or a quarter of an inch shorter. It's like one coil, but then it's like really spongy, right? It's not the same thickness. It's probably not the same spring material. But it would keep the oil pressure down. Like you'd be turning like, say, 45, 50 pounds of oil pressure when the other one would be like, say, 60, 55, 60 pounds. But because you weren't running all that volume through there, you weren't running all that volume through there, it would actually kill how much horsepower that you would be eating up on just turning that pump. If you open up all those oil passages, that number will go down drastically as well, right? Because
and polish them too. You got to polish though,
Yeah, I'd say that's probably more critical than porting like cylinder heads, the smoothness of the cylinder head. When you're flowing a liquid through something, I'll bet
Yeah.
you the friction is 1,000 times more than it is with air, right?
Yeah.
And it's got to be. But
And that's why I'm glad that you brought up about blueprinting, is because that was going to be my next part I was going to talk about, is that you just don't buy a stock pump and put it in there, because a stock pump's going to have clearances for stock style of engine. Always take it apart, always blueprint it, always check it, and and just know what you have in there. Measure everything and deburr everything, like Dallas was saying. I can't emphasize enough. If you have a 90-degree corner and you just take the tip out of that corner, you just help that thing exponentially make that corner, because now it's not going to hit a wall, do work, which is going to create heat and resistance to turn a corner. If it can actually round that corner and still have the point in the back, but actually have some sort of turn, you're going to create less heat and create less work, because you're going to have a pressure loss by going around all these corners. Each time you turn the corner, you're going to have a pressure loss and a restriction of some sort. So the more corners, the more that you can take away, and the more you polish it, it's just going to make that work easier, and you just save a ton of power. And there was, as we were talking about this, I was reading this, and there was a gentleman in here, Nicholas R. He was saying that the Snap-on guy that comes to my shop used to work on Elliott's in the 90s. He said that he did some touch-up on the oil pump in the super speedway engines, and it was worth 8 to 10 horsepower on the dyno. And that is true. I mean, you're talking about an engine that's on the edge, and they did some touch-up, and they made 8 to 10. For guys like us that are dealing with like lower numbers and lower type of stuff, you put that amount of time into it. I saw 15 horse. You could probably nowadays see probably more than that. I guarantee it, because
I kind of look at it like this, that you're pumping oil, right? And the oil pump that's the whole purpose of it, is pumping oil. When you actually hit the max limitation, let's say it's 60 pounds of oil pressure, it's the max limitation of your, I don't know, half-inch passage that's in your block, okay? At that point, you're starting to create a hydraulic press. You're making a hydraulic pump, okay?
Yeah.
When it can't freely flow, it's starting to back up pressure into the pump, and that's where the relief is starting to relieve. You don't want the relief to relieve.
No,
you want all that oil to go through and then dump out in the tolerances and the clearances.
Because if you're backing up, like he was just saying, if you're backing it up, that's more power you're losing, because now it's basically back upon itself, and it's basically just being wasted pressure on a relief valve, because it's still making 40 pounds of pressure, whether it's going out or whether it's being released at the pressure release valve. It's still doing the same amount of work. So you want that to keep on moving, and that's the reason why we opened it up. We want the higher volume. We're just trying to keep the pressure down.
Yeah, but free horsepower for you. I'm sure if you're gonna end up building an engine, just go through the passage. Most of them are drilled with a drill bit, and they're at obtuse angles, like Shane was saying, or some of them are acute, right? But like the Buick has 690-degree or greater turns in it from the time it picks up oil in the pan until it actually puts it on the number one cam bearing, right? 90 degrees or greater. There's one of them that goes in the block that's 180. So it behooves you to open all that stuff and make it flow as freely as possible.
Yeah, and there's actually someone here. I'm going to butcher his names, but I think his name's Lynette Burns. Yeah, I mean, I could get really deep into this. There's actually a formula, PV equals nRT. I mean, if you take in any type of like chemistry or physics or whatever, that's your like ideal gas loss and whatnot. And that's basically where I started driving this, is when I started going into like engineering school and classes. That's when I really started getting into the oiling ends of, and once I started seeing how much power I could make with that kind of stuff, and like things going through closed orifices. And once I was able to do that math, that's the reason why when you see all my engines, I put set screws, things with drilled holes. That way I can keep high pressure on one side and then lower the pressure on the other side with a set screw, but it's still keeping the pressure high on the backside. It's not just free flowing. So that way I can distribute the oil how I want to, the way I want to. and I can experiment with things. I can actually experiment with different hole sizes, and then math it and see, is this going to work? Is this not going to work? I don't know. This is the empirical, and this is the actual. So let's see, do they match? So,
yeah. Well, that's it for today's. That was a deep dive, dude. I feel like we should have some kind of award for that. Like some Submariners award, like the bubblehead on the bottom award or something.
Right? I got to tell you, man, that I knew that would. That's why I wanted to talk to you about it, because I knew that would be a good one, because it is absolutely free horsepower. And when we were talking about it, that's going to strike a chord with all the people that watch this, because they want something. With the way parts are coming nowadays, they're coming so damn slow. You have nothing more. You have more time now with your engine block and your oil pumps and all your setting up. So why not do it? It's not like in the days where you would just drop your card and all of a sudden, all your parts show up and you're, in 1 weekend you're trying to slam together this engine. It takes months nowadays.
Well, don't think like I'm some freaking genius or like figured something out. I'm telling you, when I was in high school, the thing used to be high volume, high pressure oil pump, right? And that was the standard thing. I threw it at it, and oh man, hey, this is it doesn't run like I kind of expected it would.
Yeah, GTX 2050, high volume pump, high pressure,
yes.
And then and for me, and the only reason why I was running what I was is because I couldn't afford the other stuff. I was getting these wrecking yard engines, and I had one oil pump, and then I would just take it apart, I would clean it, and I would basically just put it on the next engine. In fact, that exact oil pump that I had back then is the same one that's on my engines right now. I'm telling you, it's a Melling made in the USA, and it's from the late 90s. It's the exact same oil pump. I've never bought one. I just keep taking it apart, cleaning it up, blueprinting it, sending it back on its way.
The high volume. The oil pump that's in my 393 Ford is the one that I raced with in my 351 when I first put a 351 Windsor in my T-Bird. Mm-hmm. It's like the same Melling pump, and I figured you can't go wrong. I mean, the Buicks, all we do is just essentially put a new gasket in them and put them back on in service, right? You look at the stuff. Hey, did it chew up anything? And then Ford, it's got a cast iron housing, so if it chews up anything, it doesn't score it like the Buick that's all made of aluminum.
Yeah.
Can
I talk one more thing on the Fords real quick? Because I found this out I had a Ford guy, and it was on an oil pump. And, on the Fords, they have that little hex gear, that little hex run that goes down. Yeah. And so when I was talking to him about oil pumps and stuff, so he bought an oil pump. And what happened was he picked up a little piece of trash, and it went in there. It locked up the oil pump, and it pretzeled that thing, and it popped up, dropped out, and he seized the engine. But then when I took the oil pump apart, it was a little different than what was in my Mopar. Now the one in my Mopar, the outer side has a point like this, right? And then the inner one has a clover leaf, so it has a little bit of dead space in there, even when it was fully closed, right? But on the Ford, it had where it was a clover leaf that went into a clover leaf, and it completely closed off. So then we started looking for different types of oil pumps for it, and we found one that had that the outer, like I said, the outer rotor was a V. So that way, when the clover leaf came in, it still had a little bit of gap. So if you had trash in it, it would never pump the trash. And because I knew that when I got my oil pump for my Mopar, I took it back apart and made sure that was in there. And that's the only reason why I've had the same oil pump, is because I've had that little bit of space in there, and any trash that gets in there, it never mars the oil pump, because it finds that little space and then pumps right on through it. Then it gets caught in the filter, because whenever you pick up trash, it goes through your oil pump first. So that's why I always try to blueprint the pump too, so that way you know what kind of pump you have.
Yeah. So, and that's what's funny is we were talking about this before. The Buick is like this weird. It's a gear system, like it's got two gears that mesh together. And it said 38 POS Racing saying that high volume Buick pumps kits used 409 gears in the spacer plate, didn't they? I don't know if they were 409 Chevrolet gears. I do know that they, like the small block Buick uses the standard 455 Buick pump with the shaft cut down. So if you ever wanted to do like a super high volume small block pump, you use the high volume 455 pump and 2 spacers. So, I don't know if it's 409 Chevy gears. That they could be. Let's see. Loutburn says, "Oh, I'm sorry. I hate those Ford hex drives. The ARP pump or the ARP shafts kind of solved that for me.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah,
this is all the 90s stuff I was talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So Dave Norman likes that John Wilburn was giving you crap. So Wilburn was saying this: everyone uses jets in their carburetors. Pulido uses jets in his oil system.
I do, and I'm okay with that, man. It works.
It's called an orifice plate.
Exactly. It's a closed orifice, and then you can look that up if you want to look up a little bit of physics. Look up PV equals nRT, and then start looking up closed orifice, and then looking at as far as ideal gas laws and fluid dynamics. And that's basically what I'm explaining to you guys is a roundabout way is 1 and 2 of basically physics in engineering school. It's what you basically have learned this tonight.
Dang, dude, we're already up to. We only got 15 minutes left. Tonight's went by fast.
Yeah, man, really, it's got 15 minutes, man.
Excuse me.
See, you're getting it too, man.
Oh, yeah.
I've been sucking on these right here. Right there it is. Yep. They help out.
Oh. I don't know what he's asking here. Shane, what was the best horsepower, I guess?
For
I don't know.
For what engine is I guess what I'm getting.
There's
you might be talking about my small block Mopar.
Maybe.
Yeah, that was 7. Oh man, I don't remember 7 something. When you do the math, 960s, 940s, 3 2,900-pound car. It comes out to about 7 something is what it comes out to. On the dyno, right. What's that?
That's probably right because mine was 653. It would run. The fastest one was 957, right? But I mean, my car does not weigh like yours is 3,200 pounds, right?
Yeah, well, that was that time it was 3,200 pounds, but now I've taken some weight out of it. But yeah, and that was and I think the fastest I got out of it one time was a 941 at 141, and then but I changed some things because I wanted to work in a different I wanted to drive in a different avenue. That's when I was going to try to do that 1060 index. So I kind of tried to slow the car down, and I didn't really have the cage for it at that point. In fact, I had the cage just put in. After our race, I had the cage put in to go so that way I can go to 850 in it now.
Oh, RJ Simrock put it in?
No, my buddy at Impact Chassis up there in Canyon Country. His name's Mike. Yeah, I've known him for years. He has him and my brother, they started like a chassis shop way back in the day. I mean, like way back in the day. And he's the one that did the rest of that. RJ's basically just the one who did the last. I had to put a gusset in there in one spot, and I didn't have the right temperature. My MIG welder, I didn't have the right temperature to get that thing in there.
Oh, okay. So Dust Devil, he says his damn fat fingers hit fast or hit send too fast. So he says, Shane, what was the best horsepower and torque numbers you've gotten out of a non-stroke 360?
Now, well, that's the only ones I've ever done were pump gas, and it was 515, and I can read it real quick. It was basically a 360 Magnum. The camshaft on that was 232, 245 on a 108. And it had and I was limited to 10.7 to 1 compression on that, and that one, and that one had the ported heads on it, so it was 515. I think that's. Am I reading this one right? I just want to make sure I'm reading the right one. Yeah, it's 515, and that was on pump gas, and that's something you could basically get in and drive anywhere. But you could, if you bump the compression up, you can get a lot more out of it. And you could RPM it, but that was with a dual plane intake, and I just didn't want to RPM the crap out of it because at that time I couldn't afford to rebuild it, and I knew that after 62 to 6500, you would start getting into that tingly time of, ooh, is it gonna go or is she gonna blow?
Yeah. Oh man, we're winding down. I'm starting to crash, dude. I'm telling you, this past week has just been rough.
Yeah. Oh, there was actually one above it, Shane. Right, Mopar man, Shane. You would know Slant 6 already have anti-drain back oiling system. I think most. Yeah, I know. I know it's got it. It actually, some of them do, and some of them don't. Yeah, I think he's talking about the oil pump because the oil pump sits straight up and down. I run. Oh, what is it? Is it a 1806? I don't remember the name of the actual pump, but it's got a tube stand built into it, so that way I don't have to run that tube stand. I think that's what he's talking about. And on the filter, I run those on both of ours. So that way, because that tube stand has got a little. I think he's talking about the little flap that's in there. And that flap will actually, because it necks down, it actually reduces the amount. So you can do all these oiling mods to your Slant 6, and then that little tube you press in there will actually restrict it way down. I take that tube out, I run the special oil filter, and it's basically internally tubed. And the second I start my car up, I actually have a video of me starting my cars up dead cold, and it shows how little time it takes because it doesn't have to fill the filter up in the Slant 6. It actually is right there right away.
Well, if I fire my Buicks up in the dead of winter and it's cold.
Hey,
AHRA.
John Wilburn's giving me a compliment. Let's read that. What's he saying here?
Professor P's numbers are spot on. On pump gas, 1.4 foot-pounds per cubic inch is really good. He made 1.43.
There you go. Okay, perfect. Yeah, well, that was, like I told you, that was a really tried and true engine. I worked on that for many years to get the right combination, and it did me well. And I built a lot of those. There's a lot of those things running around in Southern California. In fact, Paul Wagner, he had my very last one that I made for him, and he had it in that. Do you remember that red 64 Barracuda that he used to race up there at Brone all the time? He had the blue Dart, the 70 Dart, and then he had that red Barracuda with the big huge meats on it. That thing was.
Wait, was it 67?
60. No, it was an earlier one. It was like a 64, 65.
Oh, I remember that one.
I'll show you a picture of it when we're done here. But he had one of my engines in it that I built for him back in like 14 or 12 or 14. And it's still running to this day, still running dead on.
Did you see that the 10.5 NA? Because we used to play around with the 10.5 NA guys, right?
Yeah.
And you see that their record now is 480.
Yes, I did see that. That is insane to me. That is absolutely insane. Remember when they were they broke into like 550, and that was like totally fast. But yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like Sherman's car was running 570s.
Yeah, and that thing was basically a go-kart with an engine. I mean, that thing,
Yeah, 480. NA 10.5.
Who is that? Who has is that?
Who was it? Shiloh that has
Shiloh
the
Davis.
Dart? Yeah.
Yeah, just breeze it. That's the 68 Dart. He has one of those. He's got one of those Brett Miller engines in that thing. That thing is bad to the bone.
Well, I think it's probably 460 cubes or better for a small block.
I think it's 430 something cubic inch. I think it's 430, but it makes and I'm not going to give it away, but I believe it makes 4 digits.
Oh, really?
Yeah, at like
NA.
NA
NA. Yeah,
at
that's like unheard of.
at 8,800 RPM or something like that.
Oh
I'm not going to
God.
tell. Yeah, it like I said, it's up there. In fact, like you can go look at him up. He's on YouTube or he's on Facebook. Someone does it, but Shiloh Davis, and the car is called Just Breeze It or something like that. And it's pretty badass. It's a pretty
Yeah,
badass.
well, there
set.
was. Oh man, I'm telling you, me and Shane were like the slowest guys out there because we like had kids and a house payment and like we're responsible. But we I mean, I could have spent a lot more money on my car, but it's just
Oh
like
yeah,
Christmas, F that, we're going racing, and I that was not me. I'm just like, hey, I just have fun, and as fast as the car goes. Matter of fact, I hated it that it actually ran down in like the nines because they were required to have all this stupid safety crap and the
safety equipment.
licenses and all that stuff. And it's like, look, guys, I go 5 times a year,
Yeah,
$300 something for a license 5 times a year is not worth it. I'll slow the sucker down to run 10 flat.
That's exactly what I did.
Damn thing.
That's exactly what I did. I went out and bought an ET Genie. If you guys don't know what that is, go check it out. And that way, it wasn't a throttle stop. It was so I could still continuously run it wide open, but it was basically like a twin little blade thing that would shut it down. And I could get that thing to run 1003, 1002, and it was just dead on, boom, boom. And it was still fun. And like Dallas was saying, Verona, they would allow you to kind of get away with it because we kind of knew the guys and they knew that we could drive up there. But you go to any other track and you would bust off anything in the 999 and you didn't have that 8.5 cage. You were just like, oh man, all the safety equipment.
I had all that stuff, the window nets, the gloves, the whole 9 yards. And you're like, what am I doing this for? This sucks. All this safety stuff sucks, man. It's not even like you can't breathe in the helmet. And then who was the starter there at Verona? That guy would always give me shit, like put your visor down. It's like, dude, I'm in the car with a windshield,
Right.
Right. It's just like I gotta have a full face helmet, but it doesn't say I have to have the fucking visor down. So,
yeah, and I have glasses, like sunglasses that have a prescription in them, and I'm always wearing something, and I have those on there, and if I do like that and my lens, it fogs up, and
that's my problem. I would sweat in there so bad it would fog and steam up, and then I couldn't see it all. So I just leave it open, and it's like I'll take a chance of getting something in my eye, bud. As long as I could see this damn car, it's going to run, 620s in the 8th mile. I want to be able to see where I'm going.
Yeah. Hey, Michael Schmidt gave us a super chat. I just now saw
that. Yeah.
Oh.
Well, thanks, Michael. Good times, huh? Which
Right.
ones? All of them?
Right.
Man, you know what? We should put that aside for Shane's Burrito Fund. Next time he comes to the Murfreesboro area, I'm going to take him out to the shop in Murfreesboro. Now, I'm gonna
eat 2. I'm gonna get one to go, man.
Great.
Oh, speaking of which, I want to hit one more here real quick, and then we're gonna go a little long today, really quick, because I heard that In-N-Out is now moving to Tennessee. Did you hear that?
Yes, and they're going to be in Franklin, which is by me.
I know, and I told Lisa, it's like when they're coming to Tennessee, I'm like, they're not coming to Memphis area. Who wants to come here? I said they're going to be in Middle Tennessee, is where they're going to be, probably in Murfreesboro.
Well, they're going to Franklin is going to be their East Coast headquarters. So I'm assuming they're probably going to put one in Franklin, and there's probably going to be some in Nashville. But if you notice the pattern here, they went from California to Vegas to Texas,
yep.
And then now to Nashville. So it's like those big hub cities where you have like all of the debauchery and, because they say that Nashville is the East Coast Vegas, right? And I don't know. I live 19 miles from Nashville, and I have been there 0 times.
Yeah.
I spent my life in the Navy. It'll be mundane.
Right.
I'll be like, oh, this is so boring. Let's go get some Coke and some hookers, but I'm kidding.
Hey, above this, a Dust Devil Garage asked a really good question because I did find the limit. So it's 3 up at 8:53 p.m. He asked it. He says, okay, one last question. What would be the biggest shot of nitrous you would run on a hyperkinetic piston? Any tricks for nitrous and hyper? Yes. I'm telling you how I did this is whenever they tell you about the gap for your rings, and they tell you if you're going to run the 250 gap, you do, what is it, 3 thousandths per whatever your inch or whatever the formula is. Always go one bigger with a hyperretentic piston.
That's what I was just going to say, was like you
One
go
bigger.
to the next size up.
Yes, go one bigger, and then always run one lower on the shot. I'm telling you, it works. So for instance, if you go to the little chart and they say you can run a 300, and let's just call it a 300 shot on this setting, and set it up for the 300 shot, and then you'll be safe to run up to about a 200 shot. And I've run a 200 shot on a hyperretentic piston. And I was set up to run a 250, which would have been my standard normal shot for what I was going to be running. But I had other issues. I had remember those fuel pumps back then? You had either a Holly blue or a Holly red. Remember that was like the best pumps. And literally, my Holly blue ate itself to death. That little cast iron body, or the cast pot metal body that they had, just the veins ate itself to death, because I had one for the fuel system, one for the nitrous system there, and they just ate themselves to death. And so I wasn't able to get the 250 shot on it, and then other things happened. So, but I personally have run 200 shot, and I opened it up bigger than I wanted to, one bigger, and I always ran one lower. So that way I gave myself a little bit of cushion, because the hyperretentic piston will actually expand rapidly, really fast, and it will break.
And they have really tight piston to wall clearance.
Yep.
So I did the same thing. I was experimenting with nitrous. That was my first time running 8.5-inch Outlaw class. I had 26x8 slicks and a Ford Explorer GT40 P motor, and with an E-cam in it. And then I swacked that sucker with some 150 shot, and I was happy. So then I got a second system that was a used piece, and I was swacking it with 150 off the line, and then another 125 at the 60-foot mark. And she came apart about the 10th time. And then what I ended up doing was honing that, because it broke the pistons. It broke the pistons in that block. Or it broke 2 pistons in that block. And I went and got another Explorer motor out of the junkyard, and I honed it to where it was essentially 3 thousandths bigger, and then put it in there, and it didn't blow up like that. But I ended up that's the first time I split the block, 302 Ford. I split the block on it. So they don't like having all that. I mean, because when you're making 400 horse and then you're smacking with just about as much nitrous oxide, they don't
it's the same power. They split right down the center.
Yeah, especially if you so if you're wanting to do things like say you're wanting to do a 200 shot or a 250 shot, and you got hyperretentic pistons, you can get away with it, and there's easy things to do. One, never be greedy. Always be on the conservative side. So if it tells you to pull, like, let's see, what is it, 250 shot? Is that what he's trying to run? 200 shot?
He didn't say, but I just said arbitrarily 250 shot, because that's about your standard number. 200.
So in a 250 shot, you should be pulling about 14 degrees of total timing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So pull 16, right? Pull 16
Always do
degrees.
One more.
And if you do if it tells you need a, 35 jet in the fuel side, put a 36 fuel jet in it, right?
Yeah.
And it'll be a little bit fat, and it'll be a little bit lazy, but it'll be a little bit running when you're done. So that's the big thing, is you never get carried away with it. Always always leave it on the rich side. Never get aggressive with the timing on it, and it'll handle most of it. Now, will you have to change oil quite a bit? Probably. Will you probably end up glazing the cylinders if you did it a lot? Yeah, probably.
Yep. This will make it live. For how long? That's for you. I mean, there's really no answer to that. This will survive, but for how long, I can't tell you. I did it. It worked. I had other problems for something else, but I never sent parts out the bottom of the pan for that instance on that time. I sent.
Yeah, they start to smoke after a while, and I think a lot of it has to do with it glazes down the cylinder wall so bad.
Well,
But
for me, it was the tension in the rings was gone. I noticed that is that when I would pull them out after on the
oh, they
pistons
got
after a
hot.
while,
Yeah.
yeah. So the gap that was once there is not there. Basically, it's like already pre-gapped now. It's like you don't have to use a spring compressor the piston ring compressor to get in there. Basically, they would drop right in, and I was like, oh. So basically, for me, it was when the rings were gone. Then that's when I would just get new rings and I'd put them.
I just came up to because I was using Total Seal had just come out with the gapless top rings.
Yeah.
That's what I was using on those things. But every season I'd tear it down because before that I was just bracket racing, so you'd never tear it down unless it started knocking or making noises or whatever. But when I did the nitrous, let's see, I was in the second season. About 2 weeks in, it started smoking pretty good, and I'm like, oh crap, now is not the time because I just had off season like 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And so I ran it the rest of the season like that. Oh man, I was changing plugs. If you thought you changed plugs a lot before in a nitrous car, I was changing plugs a lot because it would foul them. It would not with fuel, but with like oil, right? And it would get bad. So I was running like the thickest oil you could get, and it'd be still washed down by the end of the weekend. And then, but I made it to the next season, and I honed it and slapped some new rings in it, and she was tip top for the next season. So, all right, well, we got to get out of here. It's 6 minutes late, man. I owe you some overtime. That's what that $5 was for.
You just
Michael
give
Schmidt.
me 2 burritos. Next time you see me, 2 burritos. I'm gonna take one to go. How about that?
All right, dude. All right, well, that's the conclusion of the AHRA Wednesday Night Tech Talk. Don't forget to head on over to the AHRA eBay page, get yourself some decals, a t-shirt, a hat, booby tassels, whatever we got over there that you want to buy it up.
Yeah. And for me, if there's something, like always, if there's a question you want to ask we didn't get to, slantdailygarage@yahoo.com, slantdailygarage@yahoo.com once again, and that way I'll get to it. And I actually had a massive amount last week. I had, I think, almost 15. So that's
sweet. Yeah,
it's pretty good. So it helped out a lot.
Double overtime.
Yeah,
4 burritos.
Right. All right, guys. You guys have a good week.
All right. See y'all later. We're out here.
Peace.